the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week.
Hello, kia ora. My name is Callum Armstrong, and welcome to Business Story of the Week.
Fantastic. And that is the man himself. Callum, my name is Joshua, your host. Every day, every episode, we kick off with a question, a riveting question. And the question for today's episode is, can businesses really save the planet? Well, Callum is the perfect guy, perfect guest to answer that question. Callum Armstrong is a marketing coach, consultant, and social entrepreneur. Over the past 6 years, he has built and exited multiple businesses, including a skincare brand focused on reforesting New Zealand. He now helps B2B services companies achieve sustainable marketing success while also working on environmental conservation projects. And today, Callum is going to share his journey with us. Callum, how are you doing? Thank you for coming on the show.
I'm very good, thank you, Joshua. It's such a pleasure to be here, and what an endearing introduction. Yeah, I'm so excited to share all about how businesses change the planet. I'd like to say they can, but what do you think?
Well, it's a really interesting question, right? Because most of the time it's really, let's face it, corporations are the biggest cost or the biggest cost to our environmental problems today. But is there any evolving past that, so to speak? Is there anything we can do to change that? And I believe that is the mission you have put yourself in. But Callum, before we get deep into it, what was a young Callum Armstrong like? What did he think about the environment? Was a young Callum always an environmentalist? Or what would the young Callum say to the Callum today?
The young Callum was very curious. He annoyed a lot of his teachers from asking too many questions, and they just wanted him to write what was on the board. So lots of questions, lots of curiosity. I always wanted to know how everything worked, what it meant, why it was that way. Grew up in a family that wasn't environmental, so to speak. My auntie, she had horses, and every holidays I'd go and hang out on her farm, and I guess that was my environmental connection. I spent about just over 10 years in the Scouts, Cubs and Scouts. That was the scouting movement. We did a lot of camping and learning to tie knots and survival and bushcraft, that type of thing. But it was never conservation. It was never helping nature. It was just I had that connection. I always used to walk in the forest and not know the species, not know the plants, not know the birds, and feel like there was a language I didn't speak, the language of nature. And I've learned that as an adult. But in my world growing up, my mother was a stay-at-home mum for most of my childhood. She trained as an accountant later on, and my dad he started off as a sales manager, and he became a business leader and eventually owned his own business. So I was constantly learning about business, and growing up, I wanted to be a marine biologist. I wanted to be a shark expert. But I went down the business path. I went down the marketing path, but my heart's always been there for nature. And so over the last 6 years since I started my own company, my first business, I've been looking at how do I meld business and marketing and nature and the environment, because we need to give the next generation something that's worth inheriting. But to answer your question at a high level, business owners, companies, entrepreneurs are the people that coordinate the resources that can change the world for better or for worse. So my young self, he was looking at me today, I'd like to think he'd be happy. But it's still a journey, and I'm hopefully there's a few more wrinkles to come yet anyway.
Wow, that is very cool. And of course, it always starts with that first love, so to speak, or the environment that we grew up in. We carry that into throughout our adult lives, and we find passions around that, so to speak, purpose around that as well. Callum, you do mention combining your marketing expertise now to what you do, but talk to us a little bit about that journey. Do you have as much love for the environment as much as you do for marketing? What was that journey like?
Yeah, my marketing journey is in many ways it's a professional skill set, but ever since I was a kid, I was always starting businesses. I maybe not consciously thinking of it as marketing, but I used to somewhat permanently borrow mum's icing sugar and the powders you get to make cordial juices and mix it together and sell it as sherbet behind the school, and buy and sell lollies at school. Or I had a business called Prosperity at uni that we'd import handmade clothing from remote parts of the Nepalese mountains and give a quarter of what we made to charities. And I've always had a venture on the go, not always big or successful, but always trying something and viewing that curiosity. Throughout my marketing degree, I was definitely passionate about it. And I think marketing's really good because it ties in psychology, society, culture with action and purchase. But yeah, so I'm definitely very passionate about it, but that's my profession. But it ties into my life because once you get that under your skin, once you've got the marketing bug and you've been bitten, you're infected, you can't go anywhere without seeing it. Every label, every piece of packaging, the uniform on every staff member, how they greet you, the emails you receive, the ads you get. I mean, look, scrolling on Facebook, I actually pay more attention to the adverts than what my friends and family updates are. It's probably not the best.
That's very, very interesting because oftentimes, at least for myself, I feel like I program myself to get rid of the advertisements and not pay attention to that. But I can totally see why someone in marketing who live and breathe marketing would notice all of that. Someone with the graphic designer would probably notice everything that's wrong with the logos and the graphic design and whatnot. But talking about getting it under your skin, this is something like I said, marketing is your profession, live and breathe it. Talking about getting under your skin, you also exited a skincare company, a skincare brand that focused on reforesting New Zealand. That's very, very interesting. There, Callum, and again, it aligns with you combining your expertise, your profession to environment. Still, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was straight out of uni. My father had a business that was selling floor coverings, carpets, vinyls, carpet tiles, a few other products. And one of our key distribution channels was retail shops. So businesses that would have a local store and people would come in to replace the flooring in their house. And my job was to drive around the country, around New Zealand, and service these retail stores, partly to sell them product, but also because we wanted the big commercial jobs in the area. So I was driving around our country at the peak of it, 3/4 of the country every 12 weeks. And I did that for 2.5 years. During that time, I started off, it was a journey. I started off seeing all this farmland, thinking these farms are beautiful. This is nature. These cows are so natural. And, really just loving the identity that we're brought forward as Kiwis, the big farm for the West. And as I started thinking about it more and researching it more, I realized that before humans were here, this was over 80% of our land mass was native forest. And now it's about 25 to 35%. And that these farms, many of them, whilst they were there to feed a livelihood for their families, the owners, and the communities, which is important, a lot of them were causing pollution in our waterways. And many of them you can't swim in, and degrading the natural environment for our economy. And that stuck in my head, but I didn't take action on it. A few years later, the business sold. I moved on. I got a backpack on my back and I went traveling around Southeast Asia. And I still had this point in the back of my head saying, I want to build a business that can change the world using New Zealand's unique gifts. And I stumbled across this research paper on a plant called manuka. This plant is commonly known for the Manuka honey, and there's a lot of research around that. But these research papers were looking at the essential oil that comes from the leaves. So the honey comes from the nectar in the flowers that the bees take, the essential oil is distilled from the leaves. And it had fantastic health benefits. It was beyond anything I'd ever seen. And then I started researching the plant, and I realized that this plant, Manuka, was like a healer of the land. It plants deep and flexible root systems. It creates a canopy cover that allows other more vulnerable native plants to thrive while shading out the sunlight that weeds are needed to grow. It prevents erosion. It creates shade and debris matter that cleans our waterways. If there's a fire, the seed pods explode and then recover the land so that then the new forest from birds dropping it can recloak it. So I realized, well, if we could encourage farmers, and I learned about a whole load of other types of native plants, and they all had these healing properties, and it was beyond what I'd ever seen. And so I thought, if we could make it more profitable for landowners to plant native forests on their land than any other type of farming, then we could potentially see native forests return to the country and our generation or the next. So I returned home. I started this business called Manuka Essentials. The whole goal was just to create demand for native plants. And I started off just selling the oil, but when you say it's got 100 uses, people think you're lying to them. So people wanted specific uses. So I had a beard oil, which I had skin oils, shaving bars, and soaps, and for specific uses. And but I realized that wasn't the highest impact way to help nature. So I sold the business and started the charity over time and moved on to what we have now.
I love that. Of course, it all ties down, right? It all ties together. It all combines with your passion for the environment, passion for conservation, and doing that along with your profession, which is, again, you seem to always find the opportunities where there's always purpose when it comes to preservation, and which is what you do now. You mentioned that you started your charity, and of course, for our audience and listeners out there, it is called conservationamplify.org. Go check that out right now. On the website, it says there, you bring a megaphone to the world of conservation by creating content that amplifies the stories of people helping nature. And I think that is very, very cool. Now that as we get started talking about this, and it's a great transition. Callum, how do you combine your work in B2B marketing with your passion for environmental conservation? And I feel like this leads to our very first question, to our opener question, is can businesses really save the planet? But first, how do you combine both to begin with?
So there's a few aspects to that.
Please.
And the first angle is my time. I love marketing. I love helping companies. But the truth is that unless I get tons of funding from government or philanthropic organizations, I can't do this. I can't do the charity. So I need to have the money and the time available for me and my partner to make this happen. And so running a small marketing, coaching, and consulting business and being self-employed means that I can put 10 to 20 hours a week into client service. I can have a network of really high quality contractors and consultants and agencies I work with. And that can pay my way so that I can put our profits and the rest of my time in and out of work into conservation. If I had a full-time 40 to 50 hour a week job, I simply wouldn't have the space available whilst having a life and, a love and all that. Yeah, part of it is creating the space, and that doesn't mean that I spend less time serving my clients. It actually means that because I'm not trying to scale this business up, the few that I work with, I can really serve extremely well. And so I guess personally it creates capacity, but then how I tie my marketing skills into conservation, I think we need to look at the two problems that are preventing conservation and people who are helping nature from changing the world. Now, there's a lot of groups and a lot of individuals that help nature. Here in New Zealand, for a country of 5 million people, there are over 2,000 conservation groups in the community of volunteers. That is phenomenal. And that's probably undershooting the mark. I've heard estimates up to 5,000 groups. for 5 million people. So it's really great. And I'm sure there's similar stuff going on all around the world. I just haven't looked into it in other countries. And these people are often giving their time for nothing. They are often going out of their own way, out of their own pockets, but they don't have funding. It's severely underfunded. And so when we started our charity, it was about raising funding, but we realized that when we started talking outside of our circles of people in conservation, that most people weren't aware of the problems, they weren't aware of the solutions. They were just, I don't want to use the word oblivious, but they were oblivious to it. And so the other problem is awareness. People aren't aware. And those people that are giving their time aren't typically the ones that are jumping on podcasts like we are today. They're not typically the ones that are out making documentaries and posts and films. They just want to get the job done. And they are the heroes of our generation, but they need a spotlight put on them. So our charity, we have a podcast called People Helping Nature, and we tell the stories of people that are helping nature so that they can focus on what they do best while getting awareness. And we've got plans in the works to help them get funding as well.
I love that. I love that you pointed out that the people who are getting their hands dirty, getting the work done, they don't really have time for the marketing aspect of things, which is they need help there. And I feels amazing, feels fascinating that you've kind of found that gap, you found that hole to kind of plug into, to apply your experience, apply your expertise, and put that knowledge in there where, hey, we share the same passion, and I'll make sure we put your achievement, your work out there. Very, very, very cool. Of course, to our audience and listeners out there, the name of the podcast is People Helping Nature Podcast. Go check that out as well. It is up on all the major platforms. This is now, we've come now to the point where we started with our opener questions. Can businesses really save the planet? Because it's come to our attention, and it is no secret that corporations are the bane of our climate changes. It's truly the biggest contributor to the climate change. But there are a lot more corporations now that are more nature centric. There are more corporations now that are turning their focus on that. Callum, how do you see that? How do you see the future when it comes to businesses and corporations saving the planet, quote unquote?
I think we need to look at human psychology. We are a tribe animal. It is through our collective insecurity that we have come to dominate this planet. That collective insecurity means that when we see any group of people, animals, nature, humans, companies, governments, we like to put it in a box. And a lot of us think businesses are bad or businesses are greedy. But the truth is that the business world is an ecosystem. And those ecosystems are run by people, just like conservation. So there are businesses that are greedy that will take and take and take. I could name a whole lot of corporations, but I'm sure you already know who a lot of them are. But there's also businesses that care and businesses that do good. And I could name dozens of them that are doing great. So I think it's important to remember that the journey and what they can do is subjective for everyone. A company that's been around for 80 or 100 years, that has thousands of staff, and that has existing relationships in place, and with board and governance and publicly traded stock, is in a different position to a startup that has a few people and ambitions and growth and no history and can change. So I believe at a fundamental level that businesses, we live in I want to say capitalist system, but we live in a system where money governs the flow of energy and resources. That's the core of it. If you have money, you can do stuff. If you don't have money, quite often you can't do stuff. And businesses, I don't want to say the gatekeepers of money, but they're definitely the machines that flow money around. We bring value to solutions, and those solutions can be deforesting forests and planting palm trees for palm oil and lying to customers and putting all these bad things out on the world, but those solutions can be great as well. There's a lot of good companies coming through, a lot of companies that are providing the solutions to our problems. It is through that resource allocation, it is through people taking risks, people putting themselves on the line, that so much about innovation has happened. Yes, government has a role to play, but they're typically anti-risk, they're risk averse. And yes, individuals have a role to play, but the ability for an individual to allocate resources, unless they're extremely wealthy, it pales in comparison to the ability and the flexibility for businesses to allocate resources. So I think if we look at this on a spectrum, you have governments that have all these resources, but they have to be risk averse because many reasons. And then you have individuals who don't have the resources and you can do whatever you want. You're just a person. Businesses sit in the middle and there's a spectrum, but typically they have the resources to allocate and the resources to use to put into whatever endeavor, whether that's helping the environment or not, or indirectly or directly. And they also have the ability to move, which obviously a larger, more established company that's been around with much more structure in place moves slower than a startup. But I think businesses can save the planet, but I think it comes down to a collective willingness. And I think there is also a tendency for people to point the fingers of blame. So consumers say, individuals say it's businesses' fault, it's corporations' fault, it's the government's fault. Businesses say, well, we're just serving what our customers want and demand, and we're just doing what the government regulates, and the government's just doing whatever gets them voted in. But I think it's important, instead of pointing fingers, for us to all take ownership. I was on a podcast a little while back, and we were talking about this business that plants trees when you buy. And I thought that's cool, but I said it's actually on the consumers to ask, is that tree in the right place? Is that tree native to that ecosystem? Is that tree planted in the right season? Does it have post-care so that it doesn't get eaten and destroyed, etc.? But it's also on the business to educate the customer about the life cycle of the actions they're taking and how that's helping. But then there's also a role of the government to put regulation in place. There's a lot of good regulations happening from the government. The Global Biodiversity Framework, Task Force for Nature-related financial disclosures, other ones like this. But I think the pace of change is the problem. We can change the world, but we all need a bit more willingness, and that starts with awareness.
I love that. I love that answer to that question. It's a very, very controversial question, so to speak, in some ways, right? It's because it's a very difficult question to answer, but you treaded that perfectly because it in a way, it not only gave us optimism you gave us an angle where we can all contribute in our own way, but also you gave us an angle where, a little optimism in capitalism over there, because it's just how the world works, so to speak. But instead of seeing doom and gloom all the time, why not use that as a vehicle for change, right? I feel like this awareness allows us to be a bit more optimistic of what are the possibilities that we have in our hands and what are the things that we can change in that aspect. And I love that you put a lot of positivity in that. It's one of the most level-headed, optimistic answers I've ever encountered answering that question. I truly love that. Callum, of course, your experience extends, you have a vast experience on both ends of conservation, environment, but also you love marketing. You said you see it everywhere. And I'm very glad that we had the platform to combine both of that. Of course, to our audience and listeners out there, the website, once again, is conservationamplified.org. The name of the podcast is People Helping Nature Podcast. Go check both of those out. Callum, where else can we find you? Where else can we connect with you?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If you just want to have a chat, connect with me on LinkedIn. If you are a business, a B2B service business, and you're thinking you could do with some help and you want to have a chat, come visit my website, pasteandpublish.com. We can have a quick chat and I will diagnose where you should be focusing your efforts at no cost. And then if we like each other, we can talk about working together. If we're not a good fit, I can usually put you in touch with resources or people that might be able to help. It's all about being sincere. Otherwise, Conservation Amplified is really the main project. And if you're into that stuff, great. If you're not, that's okay. But yeah, I also want to touch on two things. Firstly, huge thanks for the opportunity to join your podcast, Joshua. It's awesome that you're also amplifying the stories of business, of people helping. And but in prep for this episode, I watched a few others, and you don't just talk about profit and metrics and growth and all the typical things. You really touch on a broad spectrum. And I think it's important that we look at the people and the wider context of business, because it's just a vehicle to bring our dreams to life. And I feel like you really nail that quite well. And then the second point I just wanted to make is in answer to my last point, you said about how you love that I'm bringing positivity to the environmental question and how businesses can help. And I think it's important that we look at how do we see these things through a lens of hope and positivity, and curiosity and fun, because it can get boring and negative. There's always someone angry yelling down your throat. Sea Shepherd and Greenpeace are examples of that. Very important that they're there. You need someone to protect the bottom line of nature. There's a lot of government and intergovernmental organizations that it can get dry and boring reading up on all these things. But the fact is that if it's positive, and if we can see that there's actually a pathway where we can take action today in a way that is not going to break the bank, that is potentially even giving us a return on investment, which is always possible, or usually possible, that we can bring joy to our team, our staff, our customers, our communities, and we can make that fun, and we can have curiosity around it, that lasts. If it's not fun, if it's not positive, unless it's legislated and you have to do it to avoid penalties, you're not going to do it for the long term. And ecosystems don't change in a 6-month or a 3-month period, and they can change in a few years quite a lot. But the real change in the environment, and also in marketing and brand building, is over the long run. It's over that 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 500 year period. Maybe not many brands that are 500 years old, but that only happens when it's curious, fun, connected to your communities and societies, and that's what scales. So I think we need to bring a bit of joy into it. We need to remember our child selves. Coming back to asking me as Callum as a child, I was curious. I was wanting to have fun, and our children can teach us a lot. And I think we need to stop being serious, boring, frustrated, angry adults, and we just need to jump in the playground for a bit and then come back to the space and look at how we can bring that in a really practical, realistic way. And I hope that doesn't sound like I'm some hippie greenie waving a flag. Maybe I am. Maybe that's just what's happening. But I think we need to ask the question: how do we make this something that we want to show up to, not something that we feel an obligation to?
Wow, I love that. And of course, why not? Maybe you are waving that happy greeny, flag. Maybe that's what we need exactly. How do you make things fun? Which is true. Like we need a little bit more of that, especially in the time that we live in today. Callum, all that resonates. Everything you talk about resonates to me, to our audience and listeners. I hope they enjoyed this episode. I hope they enjoyed everything that you said, Callum. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your insights today.
Thank you again.
To all our audience and listeners out there, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Go check out Callum's podcast himself. Go check out his website. And we will see you on the next episode. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.